We often focus on the workouts and all of the stress of training. Athletes often want to do more work and work harder. But did you know that it's a two-sided equation? Stress plus rest equals growth. We need to have that rest portion in order to become better over the long run. When we have a training plan that focuses way too much on the stress and not enough rest, what we often see as coaches is injury, burnout, and even stagnation. You might not see this come right away, so it's often confusing for runners to wonder, why is this happening now when I've been training this way for a couple of months and seeing improvements? Sometimes it just takes time for it to catch up with your body. Today, we will be chatting about how to add more rest to your training and when it's important to add these rest periods and what they will look like. So I have with me today Jason Philippi, who is the head cross country coach at the University of Wisconsin River Falls, and he is here to chat about that rest and recovery portion of training. And this is even super important at the college level. Just to give some insight for people who maybe don't know, what does it look like at the college level for these athletes, who are competing at the high level, running, the sub sixes for an 8K, and what does recovery look like for them, and how do you enforce that as a coach?
So at the college level, we have our practices Monday through Friday, and a lot of times our meets are usually Saturdays. They're occasionally on a Friday during track season. By law, we have to provide one rest day, or I guess one day where we're not practicing. So that's usually Sundays at the collegiate level. And then depending on the program, coaches may prescribe that day, rest day, complete rest day for student athletes. For athletes who have been, they're training at a higher volume, they sometimes will train 7 days a week, and we may schedule a rest day every third or fourth week. It just depends on that individual athlete. But as far as during the week, we typically are going to have probably 3 days where it's just easy mileage. And, those runs may vary depending on the athlete, anywhere from 3 to 8 miles. So those are going to be considered recovery days, but they're not a complete rest day.
Right, yeah, that's really good to hear that even at the college level, a lot of these kids have been running for, at least, 5 years, and they're at that age where your body can really take a lot of mileage, being younger, being healthy, all of those things. And I think of, a college athlete, I think, okay, like they're going to be able to take the brunt of a lot of work and really be able to push themselves just with the youth and everything that they have, but they're still taking rest days and rest periods. And, I think that just speaks a lot to how important it is. And I think, a lot of athletes will get caught in the trap of, I just got to keep working harder. And, they also sometimes think that rest doesn't apply to them. Have you ever met someone, like an athlete, who thinks, yeah, that's great, like these are cool concepts for other people, but not for me?
I've been pretty fortunate. Most kids that I have coached are pretty receptive to taking that occasional rest day. It's, I'm thinking about my athletes right now through Run for PRs, and I would say there's only probably one or two athletes that are training, about 21 days in a row without a rest day. So most of my athletes, we're scheduling that rest day on every third week. At the most, but I would say most athletes are probably taking one rest day a week. That's pretty average. So it really just depends on, the experience and the number of years that you have in training. I've never really encountered an athlete where, they're too bullheaded to realize that they really need to take a rest day. Only those people that are on run streaks are really the ones who are going to want to, run every single day.
Yeah, as I've been coaching for quite a while, and I feel like I've just coached like more volume of people. I've definitely ran across athletes who are hesitant to take a rest day or just outright refusing to take a rest day. I know sometimes when people get sick and they tell me they're sick, I'm like, don't run, and then you see them running, and yeah, that's always a tricky line, because your body can handle it. Like your body, you can physically do the thing. Like you can physically go out
Mm,
on a run, but I always ask, like, how is that benefiting you in any way? And so
right.
as coaches, it's our job to really say, okay, we want to do what's most beneficial for you in the short term and the long term. Like there's literally no benefit to running, if you're sick. And
Right.
I think for a lot of people, it's hard to talk about rest, and it's hard to take that rest day, especially because I think it gives people like a sense of control to just be able to
Mm-hmm.
do their training. And sometimes, when you get sick or when something happens, to like lose that can be hard for some people. And yeah, like I know how you mentioned running streaks, which is a big topic, I think, within itself with this whole rest day thing. How do you, like, have you ever coached someone with a run streak, or how do you like approach run streaks with people? And what, as a coach, like, what's your expertise saying to you about run streaks?
Well, the more consistently you're running, and if you have a consecutive run streak going, let's say it's a year or whatever, your body's learning how to basically adapt and recover, even if you're not feeling your greatest. And I'm assuming most of those people are only going to do 1 mile just to keep their streak going if they're sick. So, kind of getting back to the conversation about being sick, I think that I always look for like how many symptoms does an athlete have, because if it's just one, then it's probably not the end of the world if we're trying to squeeze an easy run in. But if an athlete has like more than one symptom, so let's say they have a sore throat and a headache, or they have stuffy nose plus the chest congestion. So then I'm really going to back them off and tell them to rest for a couple of days. And, you think about if you're investing those 2 or 3 rest days, you're hoping that to be better in about 4 or 5 days from now. So you're going to be able to get back to workouts sooner versus if you were just to run through those days and really trying to not take any time off, you may be delaying, the amount of time that your body's going to have to fight off that illness. So for me, it's really about, especially when you have a race coming up, helping athletes identify, like, should I do the race? Well, let's see, what symptoms are you feeling? And if it always comes down to the energy level and that's not quite there, then you're always going to err on the side of caution and usually have them rest.
Right. I love how you talked about different factors that are involved. And, there's a little bit of gray area there. And I think a lot of it just boils down to stress management. We never want to overload someone with stress, and every situation is going to look different. So we don't have like a clear guideline, like you do this, you do that. It's just more of a case by case situation, and figuring out like how much stress is your body under, and is this run going to be beneficial to you or not? And when it comes to the answer of like, I'm not sure, or I don't know, that's kind of where we say, all right, well then maybe we should consider backing off, doing less. I always would rather err on the side of caution than have someone go out, do a run, and then they're more sick for an entire week, versus you take one day off, you feel fine the next day, and then you're able to continue with your training. So I'm all about erring on the side of caution. And with the stress management comes like risk versus reward. It's always boiling down to, would it be worth the risk that I'm going out there and doing this run? Is it worth, getting sick for a week? Is it worth potentially having to take longer time off? And these are questions that athletes have to face, as you get in the sport and things come up and things come your way. You're going to have to make these decisions, and working with a coach, I think, can help you. But ultimately, a lot of it boils down to no one knows how you are feeling, and really just taking control and initiative and being responsible for yourself, and knowing, just trusting your body, like knowing that taking a day off isn't going to be the end of the world. Taking a week off is not going to be the end of the world, and being okay with those things. And I think we did talk a little bit about the benefits of course, consistency is good, and running every day is good. And I think those are definitely like benefits, right? Like we want people to be consistent. We don't want people to have to take time off when it's not necessary, but sometimes it is necessary. When do you determine for an athlete, like at what point does, for mileage, for example, because we talk about consistency, obviously more miles is somewhat better, but where do we become like tiptoeing the line of it's too much, or law of diminishing returns, like you're not seeing any more benefit here, it's causing you to get sick? Have you ever seen someone maybe like overtraining and then it weakens their immune system? What are things to look for, and how do we find out?
Yeah, that's a good question, full of lots of factors. I would say it starts with, looking at what they've done in the last, 4 to 6 months. How consistent have they been? What was their peak mileage? What was their average number of mileage? Are you incorporating workouts in addition to that mileage? Like how intense are the miles? As well as what other stress factors are going on in their life? Are they able to kind of manage, their daily demands with work. Are they, I mean, I don't know. There's so many factors, and I think about sleep as being the most important. Like, what are they getting for sleep? Because, I always tell my athletes, you want to average 8 hours of sleep every night. And then on top of the 8 hours on days where we're actually getting our workouts in or long runs, you're probably going to want to shoot for 9 or 10 to make sure that your body's having that extra time to repair and restore. And if you feel like you're about to get sick, I think it's especially important to strive for that 10 hours of sleep. So I don't know if there's like a magic number of miles that you can handle before you tip the line into consistently being sick. I think it's more just about looking at all those past factors and thinking about what can you handle.
Right, that's a really good answer. And again, it boils down to there's no like blueprint. There's no set in stone laws like, if you're 40 years old and you have a 3:30 marathon PR, this is how many miles you should run. There's nothing like that out there. So again, this is kind of subjective case by case. Looking at how much stress you have, looking at your past history, these are all going to be signs that kind of lead you to an answer. And I think it's really important to look at what happened for you when you ran that many miles. What's the case? Are there patterns? Looking to see if there's patterns, because usually when you get sick or you're getting injured and you can look back at your running history, you look back 4-6 months, what were you doing leading up to that point? Are there any common themes? I know for me it's like at this point in my life, I feel when I approach like 55 to 60 miles a week, I'm fine for a month or 2 or 3. I might feel great. But eventually it's like, that's where I'm going to I get sick. I will get sick if I run that many miles, regardless. It'll be like 2 months in, I get sick. And that's your body signaling something to you, and it's something that I've had to like listen to over the years. And I know I'm someone who has the tendency to want to consistently show up and consistently put in the work and have the tendency to want to do more and all those sort of things. And just knowing that about myself, I think, is really important, and knowing what kind of tendencies you fall under. Because I know some athletes, they're more cautious by nature, and it's not an issue for them. They say, oh, I woke up, my throat's kind of sore, I'm just not going to run today. Whereas me, I'm like, oh, my throat's kind of sore, like, let's see how much I can get away with. I think some people are more, risky with their own health, or they want to really push that envelope and just see how far they can go. Whereas people like you, they're more cautious and maybe like more mature. Maybe it's a maturity thing. How can you typically tell whether or not someone's like going to push the envelope, do you think?
I think it's probably about the experience. So, thinking back to times that you've gotten sick, what were you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Were you cautious, or did you push through? And just kind of learning from those trial and error experiences. For me, I think back to last week where I kind of had a minor cold, but I didn't really rest. I kind of watched the symptoms from day to day to monitor to make sure like it wasn't getting worse. And I made sure I was getting plenty of sleep, plenty of nutrients and good fuel. So if it would have got to the point where I woke up and the symptoms were worse, I would have taken that rest day. But it kind of just stayed consistent, and I was able to fight the cold. So for me, I've just learned over time to kind of really monitor day in and day out. And I think that for people, they just need to be really in tune with their body, and kind of monitoring what can they get away with in terms of, handling an average number of miles without overdoing it.
Right. Yeah, I feel we've talked a lot about getting sick and your immune system and everything. In regards to that, just how beneficial it is to find the mileage sweet spot and to manage your stress level. But I also think there's some equal importance there thinking about, injuries, because that's a huge topic. I know a lot of runners, they get injured, and sometimes they're confused as to why it happened or how it happened and all those sort of things. And sometimes when it's like a repeat injury, I can look back and see kind of red flags or things that have happened, or if someone's injury prone and they tell me that, it's like, I want to see what you've been doing, because more than likely if you go 6 months back and you look, what did you do the 6 months leading up to that injury, there are going to be patterns. And I think as someone who's worked with a lot of athletes and seen these patterns before, It's really obvious to me, and for other people it may not be obvious, because injuries don't just usually, they don't just like boom, you wake up one day you're injured. Injuries can be something that happen over time because stress just builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. And I know sometimes, we can even talk about other things that happen in someone's life when the stress just builds and builds and builds. It's not like one day someone just snaps because, oh, like I had one stressful event. It's like sometimes people, they hold all of this like stress within themselves. They're not, doing things to manage it. And then one day, like one teeny little incident that wasn't even that stressful just causes them to like freak out, right? Like we always
Yeah.
see people who just have that chronic stress and it's like they have reach a tipping point. And the same thing happens with a lot of runners who are injured. It's like, they pushed the envelope, their body was fine. They pushed it, body was fine. Pushed it, but the body was like holding on to all this, stress, and the muscles were never able to fully recover, and like you're pushing through it, and your body can handle a lot and it can handle it for an extended period of time. But eventually, 6, 12 months down the road, you will hit a point where your body's like, I'm done. Like you put me through too much. You're continuing to do this. And it will reach a breaking point more than likely if you're pushing it too much and you're not recovering enough. And so when you look back, I mean, how far, if you were talking about someone who's getting injured, like how far back would you look as a coach to try to find those patterns in an athlete's training log?
That's a good question. I think it'll depend on the athlete and their history of injuries, but you might just start with the most recent few weeks, because if something changed with their training, like you started doing track workouts or you started incorporating hills, or you started doing speed and power, so you're going to look for what stimulants have been added recently. But then you may also explore, you may look back a few months as well. Two patterns that I want people to be aware of, because I think that this happens a lot for people, and especially my college athletes, is so the first one would be someone gets sick, right? And they take a few days off, and then as soon as the sickness is gone, they feel normal again. They jump right back into training, and that can really, I think, put you on the path to an injury, especially if we don't progressively overload our system and our muscles as we come back. And we just jump back and follow the same training plan. We see it with adults too, with marathon training, where maybe they get a really bad case of the flu and they have to take like 4 or 5 days off, and then when they come back, they don't modify or adjust their plan. They just come right back to training and they start doing workouts again, and the mileage is high. Well, then after about 2 or 3 weeks, their body maybe is starting to feel really achy, or something comes on, and that can lead to an injury. So we really want to make sure we adjust training accordingly and progress back slowly and build so that we don't end up with an injury. And then the alternative sometimes happens too, where we come off an injury and people want to just jump right back into the training because they're running pain-free and it's exciting. Well, then 2 or 3 weeks later, they end up sick because their body's immune system has been compromised by adding all this extra, minutes of activity that they weren't used to getting. And maybe they weren't getting the extra sleep that they needed to go along with it, or the extra calories, and so their immune system's a little bit weakened, and so then they end up sick. So kind of two patterns that I think are very common. They go hand in hand. Is just making sure anytime we're coming back from a break from running, we just want to make sure that first week to 10 days is basically a slight progressive overload principle, and especially when we talk about increasing mileage and workouts at the same time.
Yeah, that was kind of golden nugget there. A lot of people who get injured or sick, it can be like a reoccurring thing. It's like if you're not recovering 100% and easing back in appropriately, sometimes that in itself can cause an injury, and then that leads to frustration, and it's just a whole different ball game. So coming back from these setbacks, super important. And I know, like you mentioned, sometimes it's super easy and you just look back a couple weeks, you're like, yeah, that's why you're injured. You did too much too fast. You did, all this stimulus, blah, blah. And it's super easy to pinpoint and you don't have to look that far back. Other times I get people that come to me and they're like, I don't know why I'm getting injured. Here's what I've been doing for my training. And it's not obvious. Like you look at it and you're like, yeah, you take your easy days easy. You're not doing too many miles at all. It seems conservative, but one thing that I look for specifically on those people where it's not obvious is, when was the last time you took an off season? When was the last time you took a down week? Because those two things in conjunction are key to success. And if you're a serial marathoner, serial half marathoner, if you're someone who's out there running 30, 40, 50 miles a week, every week, all the time, your body needs a break. Even though that's like kind of your normal and that's like your body's super used to it, you can't do it all the time. It's like taking a vacation, right? Like, yeah, you can go to work every single day, 9 to 5 every day. But there's a reason that you're given vacation time. There's a reason you're given holidays and weekends. It's because if you worked every single solitary day, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with no break, and you just worked every day, you would reach a point of like burnout, stagnation. I mean, there's reasons for rest periods. And in running, it's also very important. So sometimes people, they're afraid to like let go of that routine. They don't want to take that week off after their half marathon or their marathon training cycle. And then they just become stuck in this thinking that, well, I've peaked, or, well, I'm just injury prone, when in reality, it's like, just take a week off, take 2 weeks off, start treating yourself more seriously and saying, I need an off season too, or I need a rest day too. Especially these cutback weeks are so critical. I see this mistake so often. And I guess clarifying, like, what is a cutback week, So what do you think a cutback week is, Jason?
Yeah, I'd say cutback week. I mean, it would be defined as about a 15 to 25% drop in the mileage. So basically, for most of you, if you're running, let's say 40 miles a week, your cutback week should be at least 30, if not even into the 20s. Typically, you're going to add in a rest day. So right there, that is going to be easy for you to hit your cutback because you're probably getting 5 to 7 less miles on that rest day. And then, maybe if you're used to doing 6 miles on an easy day, you lower it to 4 or 5. So, and then possibly one less workout as well, or your workout's just going to be a little bit easier, so less intense. So that's kind of what I would do when I'm structuring a plan, is I make sure that, if we're not going to pencil in another rest day, we're going to at least reduce the amount of mileage for easy days and for the workout or the long run.
Right. Yeah. Cutback weeks are super important, and I try to give my athletes cutback week, over 3 to 4 weeks, just depending on a lot of factors. But for me, when I view that cutback week, I just look at, before I plan it in, I look at what did they do the 4 or 3 weeks leading up to this cutback week, because chances are those were heavy weeks, either mileage building, intense workouts, long run building. So I just think of, all right, like how much stress. I look at all the stress that I'm asking their body to take in. And then when I write the cutback week, I'm like, all right, we got to make sure they're really like deloading all of that stress, because if we're just not fully recovering from all the stress I just asked them to do, then there's no, like, I can't continue writing the plan. I need to make sure that the stress will be pretty much like counterbalanced in that week, like make sure they're feeling good, because the last thing you want is like stress and stress and stress, and like then no one's improving. The key here is, the whole formula: stress plus rest equals growth. And of course, we're taking our easy days easy and recovering in between workouts, but you also have to think about this balance of stress on a macro level. And I think a lot of times people forget that, on the micro level, it's like, yeah, you recover from your workouts with an easy run. Everyone kind of gets that principle. But a lot of times people forget, if you have like 4 really intense weeks of training where you're increasing the stress stimuli, you need to counterbalance that by giving like 1 week or 5 days or 7, 10 days of no stimuli, reduction of stress, because on a macro level, you have to also recover. And that's why, we taper before a race. Taper is a very, extreme cutback, in mileage and all that stuff, so your body can fully recover. But it's important to have other weeks within a training block where you are allowing your body to kind of deload some of that stress. So what I do for a cutback week would be maybe no workouts, just depending on how intense the build was. We might do 0 workouts. We might do 1 shorter workout. And then we're also going to look at that long run as a chance to cut it back. Because if I'm asking you to build your long run, from 14, 15, 14 miles, and then 16, and then 18, we're going to have a week where you're doing like 10 to 12, just because you can't be dipping into the glycogen storages. You can't be pushing your body and testing the limits every single weekend. we want to keep something on the schedule, like something longer. But there's just no need to continue to add that stress. We want to think what is going to be the perfect amount so that it allows you to recover and then be ready. Because then the next week, following a cutback week, you're jumping right back into what you were doing. So you want to have enough where your body's not like freaking out, like, whoa, we got rid of so much stress, but you don't want to have so much stress where your body is like going to break down. So it's finding that balance. And I think any plan that doesn't incorporate cutback weeks is really setting athletes up for failure, just because you can't keep pushing the envelope and keep adding stress on top of stress. And one of the biggest key takeaway points from any of the RRCA courses that our coaches will go through is, you have to have at least 1 week in a marathon training cycle every single month where you're running less than 90 minutes. And I mean, they hit that point home like so much. Like there wasn't really a way to fail like the class or like the whole, they made us like write a training plan, right? And the only way that, you would get negative feedback is if you forgot that cutback week. So it's super important. Very often it is neglected by people who don't, know the importance of it, or, sometimes people just straight up forget because you're building a cycle and you forget these things. But it's the number one thing that we do, and it's super important for anyone to incorporate, even if, you're just training for a 5K, 10K, a half. Very important to incorporate. And then Jason, like sometimes when you get to your cutback week, as an athlete yourself, sometimes you even feel like you need it.
Yeah, I think, you may, depending on what you did and how many weeks it had been since your last cutback week, you may feel refreshed. You may even feel a little sluggish. It's kind of like when you hear about people talking about their taper period, how their legs feel heavy and all that. Well, it's because their body's finally getting a chance to kind of restore. You were used to probably really building up mileage those last 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks leading into peak week are usually the hardest for marathoners. So I think depending on the volume and the intensity, you're going to feel different effects during your cutback week, depending on where it is, and with regards to leading up to your A race. But I think it's normal to feel different and to, for me, I always feel pretty good. And so that way I'm recharged and ready to go to start to add and build towards my next upward push.
Right. A lot of times when I get to the cutback week, personally as an athlete, how I feel is not ready to take one because there's a lot of like adrenaline, cortisol, all of these like hormones like through your body when you're doing very intense workouts regularly. And it can get you kind of feeling wired, right? Like you feel like, oh, I could keep going, and it's the hormones in your body that are causing that. And adrenaline is great for, race day, workouts, all that stuff. But if you're like constantly riding on adrenaline, you'll get to a point where your body's going to crash. And so you want to make sure you're allowing time for those recovery periods for your body to, not be running on adrenaline or whatever. It's super important. And for me personally, when I get to cutback week, I is normally when I'm feeling good. And that's okay. I think that's really important to understand that when you get to a cutback week or a recovery or a rest period, you might not feel like you have to rest. You might feel like maybe it's not the best option, but don't judge it based on your feelings because there's still like all the physiology that's at play here. I know a lot of people can relate to sometimes you finish a marathon, you don't want to take the week off. You feel antsy. It's a change in your schedule. It's a change in the routine. Maybe you don't feel like it, but it doesn't take away from the value and how important it is to do that rest. So I think that's just a really important thing to address, that even if you don't feel like it, you still gotta rest. And how does like the human physiology part work when it comes to rest and recovery? Because I know sometimes people, because they don't feel like they have to rest or because they don't enjoy resting, they think like the rules don't apply to them or they think their body is different. Are all human bodies like built the same way? Like, do all humans need rest? And how are some people just different and falling in that spectrum, or are they even different?
Yeah, I mean, I think the definition of rest is different for everyone. It really depends on what you've trained your body to be able to handle over time. And when you look at the volume and you look at the intensity, and for some people, a rest day is, I'm a preacher that everyone should incorporate an occasional complete rest day. I think it's good, especially after extremely hard sessions or after you're coming out of a marathon or half marathon training cycle. A number of complete rest days I would say are great. If you're in the middle of kind of a long build up towards a training cycle, I think an occasional complete rest day is good. But for some people, they like to do a different form of rest day, which might incorporate cross training. They may do biking or elliptical. And so I think that, by allowing that break from the repetitive movements of running, I think that allows your muscles to really get a chance to kind of repair and restore and to, become basically feel well rested so that you can put your body through an additional adaptation stimulus as you start to incorporate more miles or harder workouts or longer workouts or whatever it is. I've been reading the book recently, Inside the Marathon, about Ben Rosario's Northern Arizona elite team, and a couple of his athletes. Every now and then they'll take a complete rest day, even in the middle of their big build up to the New York City Marathon, which is what the book is about. Scott Faubles, he's kind of the main person that's talked about in the book. He'll take a complete rest day. He'll give them the option to either take a rest day or run 4 easy miles, especially the day after one of his races, basically, during the training cycle. I think it was probably a 7-mile race, and then he also did a half in the middle of the training cycle leading up to New York City. So always giving them the option, at least, to take the full rest day or to go out and do 4 miles. And I know as we write plans for people, we may do an optional recovery versus optional cross-training day. So I think it's good to have. Sometimes your athletes may take advantage of it. Other times they may feel like you don't quite need it, so they may do the cross-training.
Right, yeah, I think it's really good to add and important to know, even elites take rest day, people
Yes.
who are, this is their profession, like they don't have a regular job, that their job is to run, they still are taking the rest day, and that just drives home the importance of, rest is important for everyone. No one is immune from not having a rest. These people, you got to sleep a lot of hours every single day, and that's part of the rest. There's so many factors that go into the rest and recovery portion, and so it's really important not to neglect, things like rest days, things like recovery periods, off seasons, all that stuff. And I know we had a separate podcast where we talk all about the off season, but this kind of goes back to that point of we have to have those micro level times where we're recovering. So I guess another question that's super popular for people who take that weekly rest day, which most people should be doing that. When is like the best time to put those rest days, in your opinion? When's the best time to do rest days?
I think if you're doing a marathon training cycle, and you're doing that weekly long run, and if it's especially over 90 minutes, I think the best day would be the day after your long run, just to really allow your body a chance to repair and restore. If you're training for something shorter, and you're not doing necessarily a long run, you could probably take it maybe the day before a really hard workout or the day after a really hard workout. So I know some people, they really like to rest leading up to like a half marathon, and other people like to do a 3-mile shakeout, right? So it really depends on kind of what your body's used to in training as well. If you're used to taking that day off before a hard session, or you'd prefer to save it for the day after your hard session.
Right, yeah. I think, it really just depends. There's no like magic day where you need to have, your rest day be on X day. There's certainly preferences that are out there. And one thing that I like to say for my athletes is look at the day during the week where you have like the most stress. So like, let's say you have on Mondays, for example, you're in grad school and like you're going to a class from 6 to 10 p.m. Maybe consider making your rest day that Tuesday so that you can sleep in longer and that you can, absorb some of that stress, and be able to recover on that day. There might be other days where like you're forced to solo parent the whole day, like maybe on a weekend. Maybe that's also a good option for a rest day, just so that, you're not adding stress on top of stress. And it's all about stress management. So Some people might do their rest day the day after a long run for specific reasons. Other people, they might choose to do their rest day in the middle of the week, just because their job's very stressful and they want to have like an extra day where they can sleep in or whatever. And there's really like no right or wrong there. It's just all about personal preference and also, just within your plan where it makes the most sense. Because you can definitely run the day after a long run. Not my favorite thing to do, but there's options for rest and there's options for a recovery run there also. So one thing, for people who are on their run streaks or they don't like to take a rest day, what is something that you would share with them, or what were some things that you used to say to me when I had a run streak? Because for those of you listening who don't know, I've had more than one run streak that ran. I think I've had 3 run streaks that were over like 200 some days. My longest one was like 550 days. This was in my early 20s. When you think the rules don't apply to you or that you're invincible, I had that, it was a year and a half, almost 2 years for the run streak there. What is something that you would say to someone, like me at that time, who is struggling to take a rest day or they just don't see the value or it's difficult for them?
Put me on the spot here. I think for that, it's going to depend on, how long you've been on the streak. Because the longer it continues, the harder it is, right? Like, you feel like you have to continue it. But I guess I would just challenge you to ask yourself, like, what really is your purpose and your goal? Like, you said you want to run this time. Well, are all of your behaviors, your training patterns, are all of that in line with you reaching that goal and hitting your potential? Or this is something we could try to add to help you, even get closer. So just helping you understand, like, a rest day is not going to set you back. It's actually going to help propel you forward. And, the more rest days that you can incorporate, the better, because it allows your body a chance to recharge. And so, you're not going to lose any fitness. In fact, you'd have to take probably up to 2 weeks off consistently with no running before you start to see a decline in your fitness. And I know this firsthand. I took a full week off, went and ran a 5K, and probably surprised myself in what I could do. And, obviously you're not gaining fitness during that time where you're taking time off, but you're definitely not losing it for probably at least 2 weeks. So I think just helping you understand, like, a day here and there is really going to help you, not hurt you.
Right, yeah, and I think a lot of people who have their run streaks or who struggle to take rest days, I think they understand that, a day off isn't going to hurt them. They like to hear and the reassurance that it's not. But I think the biggest thing is they think, like, taking their rest day is almost like saying they're not committed, or they don't view it as an important part of training. They view it as, like, I'm slacking, or it's a way to like criticize themselves. Yeah. So I think for me, like, when I wanted to end my run streak, but I felt like I couldn't, it was like I felt so obligated to be running, or you put these unnecessary pressures on yourself. And for a run streak in general, I think that's a whole different ball game, because when you get to day, 300, it's like you've ran through so many excuses. Like, there's really no valid excuse at that point that you say to yourself. You're like, well, this one day it was really hard and I was a lot more tired than today, and here I am today and I don't want to run. And it can get really weird, mentally. And I think, Coach Sam, he had a run streak. He said he ran like 365 days in a row. And he said, you get to a point where, like, there's no excuse anymore. And you just have to force yourself and say, okay, well, it's been, for him it was, okay, it's the end of the year, 365, I'm done. Otherwise, there becomes a point where it's like there's no justification for you. So I think it's really important to not get caught up in those run streaks or too obsessed with them, because it can kind of lead to like those obsession, not like an unhealthy obsession, but really that's kind of what it does boil down to. And I think a lot of people who have run streaks, at least the people I've talked to, and myself included, you get to a point where like you don't even want to be doing it anymore, but then you feel obligated. So you don't want to like have that unhealthy relationship with running. And, if you're someone who's struggling to take rest days, I encourage you to like make it fun. Like when I take a rest day, I'm like, okay, how can I focus on making this feel productive even though I'm not running? So I'll be like, okay, maybe I'm going to get a massage. I'm going to, meal prep for the week. There's other things that you can do within the realm of, fitness, nutrition, all that stuff that is not running. Maybe you're going to do yoga that day. Maybe you're going to, clean your house. There's other things you can do to distract your mind and still be productive and work towards your goals in different ways, and you don't necessarily have to be running to be working towards towards your goals. You know, you can be working towards your goals when you sleep. You are working towards your goals when you get a massage. These are all things that are strategically planned so that you can, reach your potential. And so I think just as a culture and as a running group in general, just spreading the awareness of how important rest and recovery is, and remembering that that's an equal part of the equation. So do you have any last words for our audience about rest and recovery, Jason?
I just think that having a balanced approach is going to be best. So not always like you said, being so worried about it and having that unhealthy relationship with running. The more you can kind of schedule those things, those rest days, I think when the time comes, you'll be more likely to take them. And unless you're the type of person that just wants to be spur of the moment, but I know a lot of people that they're not going to be that way. They need to plan ahead so that they can kind of have other things in place to take their mind off on that certain day. So if you're on a streak, I think just having that end date on your calendar, like, okay, I'm going to try it for 100 days or for a 1 month period or for the 1 year, and then I'm going to be done with it, so that it doesn't become, the most important part of my daily routine. So, because it's not, I mean, running should be a priority. Obviously, it should be important, but I don't think it should ever be the most important thing and the thing that defines who we are. So, I think it's good to keep it, keep a balanced approach, and to have other things to help with your overall health and wellness, like you mentioned. So,
right. And another thing to know, it's all about consistency. And if you don't give your body that planned rest, it's going to find a way to take the rest when it needs it. And
true.
so we want to make sure you're being consistent, and that's going to be the biggest thing that actually leads to long-term success. So a lot of people, they burn out after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and you're never actually going to reach your potential if you're only running for 5 years. It's better to have the longevity of the sport and keep showing up, because it's a lifestyle thing, right? Like, running it's great for your health, but if you only do it for five years and then you just become inactive after that, then that's not good. We want people to have a lifelong healthy relationship with running, so that they're able to have the benefits over the course of their entire lifetime, not just a short period of time. And again, I think that's just an important tidbit to add there at the end. So if anyone has any questions, or you want to work with us, or you want to learn how you can have a cutback week in your training, or how many days a week you should be resting, we would love to hear from you and just take a look at what you've been doing, and then maybe make suggestions for what we think would be beneficial for you to help you kind of reach that next level and reach your potential. And if you ever want to try us out for a free 7-day trial, you can just visit our website at www.run4prs.co, and we can get you started connected with a coach right away on a free 7-day trial. So until next time, thanks for tuning in.